This video is not financial advice, but I've never made a video on my layman's opinions before because why? Why would I talk about it? But I've made a lot of mistakes, and I think that mistakes are worth sharing and learning from. So let's talk about what is normal or what is real. What's real is inflation, and the minimum that inflation ever gets to be these days is around 3%. By these days, I mean like the last 10, 20 years. Inflation at this point, at a minimum, is 7%. And some people would say as high as 10%. Some people would even say that inflation is as high as 100, 200, 300% in real terms, but that this is being hidden and that we're on the cusp of this type of inflation. Now, technically, the term hyperinflation is a word that has a definition, right? You can't just throw around the word hyperinflation just because it sounds cool, right? Hyperinflation is essentially where the value of a currency drops so sharply and precipitously that it can no longer functionally be used as a currency. So, for example, if the value of the currency decreased to, less than 1,000th, basically, what's the average person's savings or something like that? Let's say most people have $1,000 in the bank. That's actually not true. Most people have credit card debt, so they really have nothing in the bank. But when someone says, I'm broke, it usually means like I have a couple $100 in the bank. If you have $1,000 in the bank, you may be low class or middle class, but you're not broke. Like you have enough money to make a down payment on a car. You have enough money, to survive, to pay a month's rent. Even then you might say, okay, well, that person's still broke. But anyway, if we're talking about on the scale of, I have an alarm going off. If we're talking about the scale of a 1,000% decrease, then we start to get into the territory of hyperinflation. But before that, unfortunately, it's inflation. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's inflation. So we're in an inflationary period because the money supply has been increased. We printed more money in 2020 than we had in every year prior to 2020. So there's inflation. So at minimum, there's like all sorts of skeptics out there who believe inflation is much higher than people say. I mean, you see a lot of prices going up times 2, times 3. Look at the real estate market. Houses that were $100,000 a couple years ago are now $200,000, $300,000. So, but let's be conservative. Let's say it's 7%. So 7% is the benchmark. Let's say you make an investment. Let's say you invest in the stock market, you invest in cryptocurrency, you invest in real estate, you invest in a business. And you invest amount of, let's say it's a large amount, let's say it's $100,000. If you invest $100,000, you're effectively losing 7% of that value every year due to inflation. You're losing $7,000 a year. So if you're not making more than $7,000 on your investments, you're not making anything. Let's say a further thing. If your income per year is greater than your savings, there's a special word that I need to make up to explain this situation. I need to make up a word on the spot. If your income is greater than your savings, like let's say you have $1,000 in the bank, but you go to a minimum wage job and you earn $20,000 a year. You are, how do we call this? You're a working man. You're a working man, right? If you have $1 million in the bank and you have a high-paying job, but you only earn $100,000 a year, you're not really a working man. We'll call you bourgeois or something. You have savings. You are saving steady, but if you're income independent at that point. But if you are not, you're income dependent, and at that point, you have to think, if I invest, let's say in the bank I have $1,000, and I can put that $1,000 in the stock market. And over the course of a year, that $1,000, it's going to get 10% back, so I'm going to earn $100. What if instead you took that $1,000 and you put it toward a college class, or you put it toward self-development, you put it toward a gym membership, you put it toward tithing at a church, you put it toward something to improve yourself. And that improvement allowed you to network, get new job opportunities, learn new skills, present yourself in a better way, speak in a better way, better public speaking skills, better social skills, and you could get a better job. And that better job could multiply your earnings from $20,000 a year to $40,000 a year. So essentially what I'm saying is, if you're in the position where you have less than $20,000 in savings, you should probably, unless you're a student going to college, that's kind of an odd scenario because we've set up college as, well, it makes sense. I mean, I would consider college in a way as self-investment. You're investing in yourself. But if you have less savings in the bank than your yearly income, if you have less than $20,000 in the bank in savings, then, and some people might even say, you know, if you have anything less than a bachelor's degree, the best thing you could do, and, you know, bachelor's degrees these days cost between, depending on your financial aid, cost between $40,000 to $100,000 typically. So that's the first thing that you could do, is get a bachelor's degree. But after you get the bachelor's degree, let's say you already have the bachelor's degree, you're 22, you just graduated college, you have less than $20,000 in the bank. Probably doesn't make sense for you to invest. Because instead of investing that money, sitting on it, sticking with your current job, you could take that $20,000 and you could put it into networking. You could take that $20,000, put it into self-development. You could hire a personal trainer. Personal trainers cost $20 to $40 an hour to start out. It gets more advanced at the higher levels. But you could easily afford to, okay, I'm going to set aside $100 a month or even $1,000 a month for a personal trainer. I'm going to get in the best shape of my life. I'm going to increase my confidence, increase my mind-body connection. I'm going to spend such and such an amount of money going to social events. I'm going to spend such and such an amount of money traveling. I'm going to spend such and such an amount of money going to conferences, going to different sorts of, I'm going to hire a life coach. I'm going to hire a therapist. I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to deplete my savings, my $20,000. But if the end result is you can increase your income, that is going to have a lifelong benefit. If you're stuck, if you're like, I just graduated from college, I'm working at Starbucks, and I'm going to be working at Starbucks the rest of my life, and I'm never going to increase my income, that's bad, right? That's bad. So another way to put it is, if you invest that $20,000, you're probably going to make $2,000 a year, right? You're going to make $2,000 in a year, and it's going to compound in the sense that you reinvest it every year, and so you're going to have such and such an amount of money, right? You make $2,000, and then 2.4, and then, what would it be? 2.4 and 2.6 or something like that. I'm not going to do all the math. But you'd continue to make more money every year, and that's great. Investing's great. But if you could instead just invest that in a year of self-improvement, get a better job, then you're going to be making more money to invest. And there's a limited window. Well, there's diminishing returns in terms of age. The older you get, the less flexible you are, the less able you are to learn new skills, to get into a new field. So I would say the best time for self-investment is younger. if you're 14 years old, it's a great time to start self-investment. If you're 14 years old, it's time to read, the top 100 self-help books. If you're 14 years old, it's time to go to every conference and seminar. If you're 14 years old, it's time to travel. If you're 14 years old, it's not necessarily time to start investing in real estate, crypto, and the stock market. Not saying you can't do that, but I'm saying you'd be better served, because we don't know when a hypothetical sort of disaster is going to come. We don't know what the future may look like long term. The best thing you can invest in is yourself. And this includes, things that are not financially gainful, but that are personally gainful, that are meaningful. Maybe you want to invest in music. Maybe you want to invest in art. Maybe you want to invest in things that are not tangible. You want to learn more about history. You want to have whatever it is. You want to learn a language. These things can have financial impact, but in some cases you're just doing it because you enjoy it. But in this video, we're kind of focusing more on this return on investment. So what happens after you have more than $20,000 in the bank? After you have $20,000 in the bank, it makes sense to say, okay, I can always invest more in myself. That's always possible. But I have this money sitting around, and there's nothing I can do with the $20,000. There's no amount of life coaching, physical training, whatever, networking, traveling. I couldn't really do any more to develop myself with this money, or there's diminishing returns, right? The first $100 you spend on yourself. I think one of the best things we can do in terms of self-investment is buying ethical, organic, non-poisonous food. 90% of food that people consume is poisonous, or it's more poisonous than an alternative, which is about twice as expensive. I buy grass-fed meats. I buy grass-fed ground beef, or I buy free-range chickens, and that's at least twice as expensive as the poisonous alternative. Now, the FDA and the USDA will do studies and research, and they say, well, there's no discernible difference. Yeah, that's because they're lying to you. At the very least, there's an ethical difference, and I do think that when you understand, when the vegetarians are kind of like fire and brimstone preachers, and you're just going about your business, and then someone comes up to you and says, hey, you're going to hell, and you're like, whoa, this is scary. I'm filled with fear now. In terms of the vegetarians, they go up to you and they show you videos of factory farms, and whereas before you were just blissfully unaware, eating meat without a care, now you've seen the videos, and now you're morally culpable for each meat product that you consume. You're morally culpable for funding the practice of factory farming. So let's see. See what time it is real quick. That's interesting. Don't know why that's going on. Let's fix those settings. Let's fix this. Okay, so this is going to be a break. This is going to be your water break. People say, well, why don't you edit it in? You used to edit in. Why am I in a different time zone right now? Why you used to edit it in? Why don't you just edit in the whole thingamajig-jog these days? And the reason I don't edit in the whole thingamajig-jog is because I don't have internet. My internet's not fast. It's not convenient. I'm working on it, but basically, if you're watching this and you're responsible, there's a couple of people in this world, and I'm one of them. I'm responsible, right? Whenever you trust people to make a decision for you on your behalf and you don't make it yourself and you're not involved and you just say, hey, someone else will take care of it, then you have issues and you have problems, and then you don't have internet for months on end. But people promise me, they say, hey, you come over here, we'll get you internet 100%. And I say, great. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you that we're going to get internet. This is a personal problem. This is a personal beef. I'm complaining. I'm filled with resentment. Let's let go of that collectively. Let's, you and me, take this opportunity to let go of resentment and say, it's a learning experience. We were deprived, because you guys are like, oh, I missed the water break. I want to see the water break. And I say, sorry, there's no water break because there's no internet. Where there's no internet, there's no water break. Whose fault is that? That's mine, but that's in the past. Mistakes were made. We thought we could get internet. Now we don't have internet, so now we're without internet. Now we're complaining about it. But we're going to stop complaining, and we're going to continue the video. Water break over. Hope you got your water. See, I got my water. Got my glass bottle right here. This is a papaya blend that I drank, and now it serves as a water bottle. So anyway, so if you have more than $20,000 you're trying to invest, there's a couple of different things. First of all, everyone lives somewhere, right? So you may be paying rent. And if you're not paying rent, you may be living with your parents. Living with your parents is less than optimal. It's less than optimal, generally. For some people, they love it, but I think ultimately you should, I believe it is the Spartan way. I believe the Spartans said that all boys should be moved out of the house by age 12, and I think that's appropriate. I don't know about you. I don't know about the Italians in the audience. I don't know about, you multi-generational families out there. But I think that you should have a place that you can call your own space and your own property. And I think ideally children and boys, I'm a boy, so I'm speaking from my gender at this point, there should be a movement out of the house around age 12. And what fashion and how permanent that is and whatever, that's up for debate. But I think that there's a way to do it. I think around age 12 is the time when young boys are kind of getting angsty. They're getting that teenage angst, and I think the proper response to that is they got to get out of the house. They have to get out from under the care of their mother and to move away from that expectation and to move toward not independence totally. They're still going to have authority figures in their life, but to move away from that central authority figure and to experience different forms of authority. So obviously that's not a norm. It's not normal for people to go off to boarding school at age 12. I think it probably should be normal to some extent, or more normal than it is, but it's not. So the reality is that most people don't have the opportunity to leave the house unless you get legally emancipated, or some weird situation you move in with your aunt and uncle to become the Prince of Bel-Air. Unless something like that happens, then you're pretty much stuck at home through age 18. 18 is your first opportunity. If you're going to a local college and you're staying at home with your parents and commuting to college and you can't work because you have I think people can work and go to school at the same time. But let's say for whatever reason you say, I'm going to stay home during college. Then your first opportunity is 22, and by 22 you should move out, and it's going to cost you money. And so investing in real estate is a great way to turn what would otherwise be a rental fee into equity. Now, if you don't know what the term equity means, it simply means that, let's say I rent a house for $1,000, and I do this for 12 months. I've spent $12,000. The return is that I got to live somewhere. But I have not actually invested anything, right? It's like when I buy a piece of chicken and I eat that piece of chicken or ice cream or whatever. I buy something, I go watch a movie. I experience that. It's something necessary. I have to eat. I have to live somewhere. But I'm not going to get anything back, at least not sort of materially. Whereas if you buy a house and you take out a mortgage and you pay $12,000 into your mortgage, you've now paid off $12,000 of your mortgage, and you're that much closer to fully owning your house with no payments, and that's going to mean that you can eventually sell your house and make a lot of money. So if you can afford to buy a house, you should. Now, buying a house requires a couple things. It requires that you are employed for at least a year, preferably at least 2 years with the same company. You can be self-employed. You can be employed in other ways, but the easiest way is you just go to a company and you work there for 2 years. So if you're 22 years old and you're like, yeah, I want to buy a house, or maybe you're even younger, start a job that you think you can stay with for multiple years, and you do want to have, obviously, as high a salary as possible. So, typically, if your salary is, let's say your salary is $30,000 a year, kind of depends before and after taxes, but let's say it's $30,000 a year. Typically, a mortgage company will say you can afford to make payments of up to, let's say, $1,000 a month or in that region, and therefore you're going to be able to afford a house that's $150,000 for a 30-year mortgage, because you have to count interest rates and so on. So right now in the market, that's doable. There are plenty of houses on the market for $150,000. One of the problems is that any house below $200,000 is likely going to have problems. It's likely going to need to be repainted. The flooring might need work. I created a formula that I call the bad word factor. What's the crappy factor? Let's call it the crappy factor. So the crappy factor is, would it be better to say the cruddy factor? I feel like the cruddy factor, the scummy factor. There's a lot of different words you could use. But the silly factor, the amount of silliness that goes into the property. All the silly things around the property. So the silly factor, I created a formula. And you basically take I can actually pull it up for you. So you're going to take the age of the property. So let's say the property was built in 2022. Great. Probably doesn't have any problems. But for every year that is passed, it adds to the silliness of the property. So if the property was built 80 years ago, the lifespan of most houses is not really much past 80 years. So back in 1942, I suppose. So let's take a look at our silly factor here. Let's see if we can find this. I've lost everything. No, I haven't lost everything. Let's look at the silly factor calculations. So we're going to go into here. We're going to go into our spreadsheet, silly factor. So you take the year 2022 and you subtract it from the year built. And so that gives you number of years. Let's say it's around 80 years. You're going to multiply that by your square footage. That's not the square footage, the AF factor. You're going to multiply it. In this one I did, let's take this and make this 7. Wow. Lots of stuff is changing here. Let me scroll this down. Okay. So here's the ratio that I did. I said you're going to take, and what's P2? P2 is the factor. So you're going to rate the property on a scale of 1 to 10 on your feeling. The 10 would be, it's perfect, it's just been remodeled, there's no problems. You know, most houses are not a 10. Most houses, if they're in decent condition, are going to be more toward the 9. But a a silly factor of 0 basically means there is no, there's nothing on the property. Let's delete all of this and see what happens. Oh, there's a problem. I'm missing a parentheses here. Missing a parentheses. Okay. It costs about $60,000 to build a house from the ground up. That includes your structure, your plumbing, your electrical, whatnot. You're going to need $60,000 in cash. And that number is going up every day because the cost of building supplies is going up, the cost of labor is going up. Why is that? It's because of inflation. It's because we have a low supply of labor in this country. That's partially because the government is giving out all these unemployment checks to people, and people don't want to work there. It's basically making people say, why should I bother working? And so people would rather stay, and people are increasingly becoming NEETs. So that's why the price of labor is going up. The price of building materials is going up because anything that's a raw material is going to be the most affected by inflation. Okay, so it's going to cost you $60,000 to build a completely new house on a property, and that's going to take time. And if you have the time to do that, great. If you have $60,000, and then you can buy a parcel of land, probably, depending on how big it is, between $5,000 and $20,000. You can buy a parcel of land per acre. My price per acre here, depending on where it is, if it's on the ocean, if it's in the middle of nowhere, it's gonna be between $1 million per acre to maybe $20,000 per acre. So if you've got $80,000 to $100,000 in cash, highly recommend just buying a plot of land and building a house on it. But if you don't have that, you need to buy sort of a ready-made house. And so you're looking at, for your down payment, you're looking at a minimum of 5 to 20%. So on a $100,000 house, 1, 2, 3, for 5%, you're paying $5,000. But then you also have to understand that closing costs are going to be 6%. So really 5% plus 6% comes out to $11,000. So you need $11,000 in cash at minimum to buy a $100,000 house. Plus you're going to need to make repairs. So in this calculator, I'm also looking at the square footage, which is Q. So let's look at this formula. It's 2022 minus year built. Let's say that's 80. Then we're going to multiply 80 years by, and I think I can just eliminate this and make it smaller. Let's make this a 4. Oh, let's make this a 3. Let's make this a 2. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. So I actually just removed that factor. I mean, we could make it a 1. I think that's appropriate. So that's an interesting. So we actually don't need that. I'm looking at the square footage now. Now I'm stuck in my square. You're going to have to bear with me. Time for another water break, right? I think I may have messed this one up because I think I divided by the square footage instead of multiplying by the square footage. Yes. Yes, indeed. Let's take out some of these parentheses. So it's I'm going to put this at the end. I'm going to put the factor at the end multiplied by the factor. Okay. So it's your square footage multiplied by the silly factor. And let's game this out. Wow. That's crazy. That's intense. I guess I need to make the square footage, I need to decrease. So the square footage is column Q. So let's take this and divide it by 100. Let's say that. Let's say that. Okay. Now I need to make the silly factor larger. Okay. Wow, this is interesting. This is interesting how we're weighing this silly factor. This is very interesting. The bigger a house is, the more problems it's going to have. That was my estimate. You know, the cost to repaint all the rooms, the cost to refloor everything, it's going to cost a lot more. So it's very interesting. That's very interesting to me. As I'm changing my silly factor over here. Wow. I'm looking at this one here. This has, how much square footage does this have? It's got a lot of square footage. Let's divide the square footage further. This is insane. This is really weird. I have to keep toying around with this. Anyway, there's a way to toy around with it. The silly factor. The silly factor is P, and P should be multiplied by the silliness. This video has really gone off the rails, hasn't it? This is what I sit around doing all day. You've got your silly factor P, and you're multiplying it by some kind of a ratio, right? You're multiplying it. What's the silly factor over here? It's 5. It's not a great silly factor. Silly factor. Let's do that. Let's go up and do that. And then let's take this and make it 90. Still isn't working for me. Divided by 4,000. Divided by 8,000. Okay. Do that. I guess I should have 2 of those. Oh my goodness. This is crazy. How did this happen to me? I really need to change some of these silly factors. Anyway, hope you got something out of this. I got to work on my silly factor. That'll be a part 2.